Okay, good afternoon. So today's meeting, we're going to discuss about Chapter 5 on communicating orally. But before we start with our topic for today, let me briefly summarize last meeting's discussion. No? So last meeting, we discussed about how to prepare business correspondence, such as drafting, revising or editing, and proofreading. We also discuss a different type of messages because when you write, of course, you should need to identify first, no, what's the purpose and what your message will be about. So we've learned different types of messages such as positive or neutral message, the negative and persuasive message. And then we also learn about the characteristics of a good business letters, the different parts of a business letter, the different letter formats such as the block and modified block, and of course the guidelines in preparing a memorandum and emails. Okay, so those are the things that we've discussed last meeting. Okay, so again, today we're going to discuss about communicating orally. Okay, for the first topic on listening and speaking, these are the learning objectives. Describe the importance of listening. Explain the techniques that aid in active listening. Describe what an effective speaker achieves. And explain the factors considered in speaking. Now, when listening, it involves a mental process as well as the physical aspects of hearing. Mental participation is the critical part of listening. The listener must think about what is being discussed. So when you listen, your mind processes the information you hear through reshaping what is already known about the topic and storing the information for future use. Okay? So you just don't listen for the sake of listening, no? So it is just not physical listening, or it requires the physical aspect of listening or hearing, but it also requires the mental participation. Since your mental participation is the one who uh, do the critical part of listening. Okay, so the listener must really think about what is being discussed in order to absorb the message of what the listener is hearing. Okay, so what about the importance of listening? Listening is very important for or to follow through on oral instructions correctly. Okay, so as a worker, especially later on, no, when you start working, as an employee, it requires a lot of, or you will encounter a lot of day-to-day instructions, no, on how you do your work. Okay, so you must ensure that those oral instructions must be noted properly, no, and must be heard properly in order to perform your job well. Okay, then consider the additional information as you continue your work and make decisions. So what are those other informations that you need to do? And then use time productively to gain an understanding of what is being said. Okay, so although in listening there are those that listens poorly, no, or there are reasons why they are, I mean, there are errors in terms of doing their job. It's because, or one of the reason is due to poor listening skills. Okay, so listener feels insecure or fearful in the presence of the person who is explaining something that is difficult to pay attention to what is being said. So in other words, there are reason, no, for why an employee is or commits mistake in doing their job, because during the instruction process, for example, the one who gave the instruction, for example, is a strict he or she is a strict boss, no, and the employee fear to commit mistakes. That is why instead of listening properly, there will be a barrier because of his fear to that to his superior. Okay, or probably the employee who is listening is insecure to the one who is talking or giving instructions. Okay, and then another reason is the listener thinks he or she already knows what is being discussed. So this one also is a barrier, you know, because like for example, if in doing your work, and then for example, uh, your boss calls for a meeting or your colleague, and then what he or she is talking about, you presume that you already know what is it all about, no? So the discussions, you think that you are already knowledgeable about that, so you tend not to listen. Okay, and then lastly, listener thinks there is no value to what is about to be said. Okay, so in other words, for you, the topics or the agenda, for example, if you're in a meeting, for you, the discussions or the topic being discussed is not important, no? That is why you tend not to listen. So those are the reasons of poor listening. Now, listening skill is actually about the attitude of the person, no? So an attitude of openness and wanting to learn is critical to being a good listener. So an attitude of respect for others is important for good listening, and an attitude that you can contribute to this to the discussion will help you listen attentively. So the first one, an attitude of openness and wanting to learn is critical to being a good listener. This means that if you are a type of person that you wanted uh, to learn, no, or to learn something new, and you are open uh, to a new idea that may be introduced to you, then with that you have that attitude of openness, no? You are ready to listen. And then the second one is an attitude of respect. So when somebody is talking, although each one of us are unique, no, and then but if you have this attitude of respect, so you tend also to listen to others. Okay, especially if the one who is talking already has a lot of experience, and for you personally, you respect that person, so you tend to listen. Okay, and then an attitude that you can contribute to this the discussion will help you listen attentively. So for example, in if you're in a group meeting, so if you have this attitude that you wanted to contribute for the team's work, then you also tend to listen, no? So you have that attitude that you wanted to listen well because you wanted to contribute something within your group, no? Or whatever the topic of your discussion. Okay, so all this again, the listening attitude skills requires an attitude. So these three are very important when listening, no? Okay. Now here are some effective listening strategy. Okay, so in order to listen effectively, first you need to focus attention. Okay, so probably you've heard a lot during, like for example, during class, no, wherein your teacher asks you to uh, listen to your teacher or calls your attention. Like for example, when the teacher says, "Okay, students, please, may I have your attention, please?" So that means it requires to your attention, no? So you must focus. Okay. So if you're a speaker, for example, and then during the discussion or the training, you've noticed that the some of the participants are already talking or probably busy with each other, you know, so you need to call their attention. Of course, the reason for this is you want to call their, I mean, to have for them to focus on listening, no? Okay, so there should be focused attention. And then summarize and review. So whatever the discussion or the topics discussed, then you need to summarize. Or for example, if you're the listener and then you wanted to recall all those things that were discussed, you tend to personally make a mental summary of those things you've heard in order for you to remember those, no? Like for example, if you are given instructions, okay? So you tend to make a mental summary of those important things for you to remember uh, those things, no? And then lastly, take notes and ask questions. Okay, taking notes is very important, especially if you are answering a call and the caller gives you an important message, no, for you to relay to your colleagues or superior, for example. Then taking note is very important. So while listening, you take down notes. Okay, and then for trainings, for example, if the speaker or just like in our case, I really encourage you to uh, while watching and of course listening, no, you take down notes. Okay, since uh, for you to ask those questions afterwards, no, uh, like during our uh, weekly group discussions. Okay, so take notes, take down of your questions, and then forward it to our class Biddle for her to summarize those questions, or you can directly message me, no, on your questions, so you can uh, immediately receive an answer on those questions. Okay, so again, those are the some effective strategy in listening. Okay, now of course when you listen as a listener, uh, communicating orally involves speaking also, no? So here are some tips on speaking effectively. Number one is to express ideas clearly. So thinking must precede speaking. So what does it mean? It means that when, for example, if you're a reporter in your class, no? So before you start reporting, you need to think first of what are those things or messages or topics that you are going to discuss or to report. So that is why thinking must precede speaking. Okay? In short, before you speak, you must think first what are those things you are going to talk about. Okay? So it should be uh, laid down clearly with regards to the ideas. Okay? Then next is speak clearly in an appropriate tone. Should be proper enunciated, no? So please ensure if you're the reporter or the speaker, you should really enunciate, no, those words for the audience or your classmates to really understand what you are talking about. Okay, and then use standard language. Then also consider your audience. Okay, so like for example, if you are given topics by your teacher and then you need to consider your classmates, no? What are the extents of their knowledge on that particular topic that you are going to report, or anything that would be important for you to learn about your audience. Okay, so in order for you to deliver your message to them properly or for them to understand, no? Okay, and then be aware of nonverbal communication. So in other words, those actions, no? So we heard this saying that action speaks louder than words. Okay, so be sure when you make some nonverbal communication while speaking, be sure that it should be consistent, no? Not or it doesn't contradict on what you are saying or talking about. Okay? And then be interested in the listener's response. Okay, so from time to time, you need to also observe, as the speaker, you need to observe the listener's response, their nonverbal communication as well. So it is really very important also, no? Okay, so those are the tips on speaking effectively. Now let's proceed with the presentation. Okay, so aside from writing, speaking, listening, which are important skills, no, as an employee or later, especially when you start working, you also need to present or do some. Probably it depends on your job, no, whatever. Like if you're, for example, part of your job is to do presentations or make a reports or whatever. So you need to also know about how to present effectively, no? Okay, so when you are tasked to present, for example, so first, before you start your presentation, the first thing that you need to know is determine first what's the purpose of your presentation. Uh, okay, so there's two major purpose of presentation. First is one to motive. I'm sorry for the, I think it's one to motivate. Sorry for the misspelled word. Want to motivate and influence your listeners. So this one, it's a message that needs to be persuasive, no? Okay, so that's the first purpose why you want it, why you are to, you do presentation. Again, I want to reiterate that one purpose is you want to motivate and influence your listeners. Okay, so that the type of message you wanted to give is to persuade your listeners or audience. That's the first purpose. The second purpose is if you want to inform and educate them. So the message should be clear and concise. Okay? So whatever your message is, uh, especially if, like for example, if you're the speaker of a particular topic, in example about leadership, then you wanted to educate those audience, no, or those participants. Okay, so again, your message should be clear and concise. Okay, now if you're the speaker in a presentation, of course, this one is another tip, no, for you to prepare your presentation. So I would advise that you need to profile your listeners. In other words, you need to know who are your audience are, no? So the following questions will guide you in profiling your listeners. First is by asking what do the listeners like or dislike? Okay? So what do the listeners need? What is the expertise of the listeners? What biases do the listeners have? What responsibilities do the listeners have? And are the listeners the decision makers? Okay? So these are some questions that will guide you in preparing your presentation, especially in the delivery of your presentation. So for the first question, what do the listeners like or dislike? This will give you an advantage, no? Since you will be able to choose those message that you wanted to give based on your audience or listeners like or dislike. Okay, so what they need. So you outline your presentation on those things that the listeners should need to know, no? And the expertise of the listener. So again, this is also very important. And also, who are your audience are or the listeners? Are they the decision makers? So if you are trying to present a product, okay, and then those participants in your presentation are the decision makers. So your goal there is to really persuade those audience or participants or listeners to buy your product. Okay, so you with that, you need to really prepare your presentation well. Okay, so that ends our first topic. Now let's proceed with planning and preparing a presentation. So when you plan your presentation, of course, number one, you need to develop the message. Okay? So, of course, before you can develop the message, then you need to know really first what's the purpose of your presentation, no? So, in developing your message, you need to organize your ideas first. So, sketching out and organizing your thoughts can be helpful, and this is actually called storyboarding, no? So, you list down all those ideas of yours and then try to organize it. Okay? And then include supporting details, like for example, if there are proof or evidences that you need to present just to prove your point, no? So probably history or statistics data, uh, if it would help your presentation or the message wherein it will give more, uh, I mean, it would be truthful, no? Or probably it will make your audience really believe that the messages you are presenting are really true, no? So again, you may include supporting details. And then consider listener advantages and objections. Okay, so what can they get out of this message that you're going to deliver? And what are the probable objections from the audience? Okay, so try to think of those things while you develop your message. Okay, and then of course when you do presentation, you also uh, need to choose visuals and or audio. So based on statistics, this is uh, uh, what is being based on the study ba. This is what visuals and audio I mean the effect, no? Like 10% of what we hear in a presentation. So in other words, in a presentation, only 10% will be uh, retained by the audience of what they hear, no, on your presentation. And then secondly, 20% of what we see. So it will retain to the audience mind only 20% of what they see. However, 50% of what we both and see and hear. Okay, so what's the impact of this statistics, no? So uh, it would say that if you wanted that 50% of your message will be retained by your audience, then you need to really develop or prepare your visuals and audio properly. Okay, so this will guide you in preparing your visuals and audio when you present something. And then you need to also choose the proper media. Like for example, if you will do your presentation using PowerPoint, so you need those of course the projector and of course computers, no, or laptops. Then create the visual elements and then design strategies. So when you design strategies, make it simple. Okay, so we'll discuss this more on the next slide. So visual elements include colors, text, or the font of your presentation, no? If you are using PowerPoint presentation, and the design strategies as well. Okay, so when you use the PowerPoint presentation, of course, you'll use a lot of text or put a lot of text in your present or your slide. So limit your text on visuals, since if it is crowded, it results in a confusing appearance. Okay, so only include those texts that are very important, no? So eliminate those wordings or texts that are not necessary for your slide. And then limit the use of different text styles, sizes, and colors throughout to avoid a confusing appearance. So uh, again, just make your slides or presentation simple, no? So do not change a lot of your textiles or sizes or colors. It would make your presentation not good, no? Because it will distract the audience. It will probably others will be confused on the appearance of your slide. And then use bullets to help the audience follow the presentation, like what I'm making now, no? Then for the color, use color effectively for maximum impact. So in other words, it is not necessary that you only use one color, but if you wanted to emphasize some words or phrase in your presentation, then you can change the color, no? So in business, these are the common colors being used, no? So like for example, in red, it is usually relates to cost, and then green if it relates to profit. Then in general, red draws the most attention and invokes its excitement. Okay, that is why if you've noticed, some presenter or they use the color red, no, to emphasize something. And then you can also use blues and green because these colors are relaxing, no? Okay. Then use motion. Cascading bullets, transitions, video, and moving images can all be used to add interest to your electronic slides. Okay, so if as a student, uh, especially if the PowerPoint is very useful, no, in as a media for for presentation. So I would advise for you to really master using the PowerPoint. Okay, so transition would help also, no? But again, uh, please keep your presentation simple, no? Like for example, all bullets uh, will be, animated or what, no? So too much transitions would also affect your presentation, no? Okay. Then effective when you want to emphasize each point as you present it. Like for example, in this PowerPoint presentation, I could actually make a transitions, no, per bullet, wherein the first bullet will be presented first, and then this next one will be dependent on when I click my mouse, no, so it will uh, presented next. So in other words, it will be presented one by one. However, for me personally, I wanted to present it one time. So at least, uh, although again it would depend on the point of view of the presenter, you know. But in my case, again, for me, it's convenient for me to have it shown in as one, no. Although again, it's up to you as a presenter, whatever you like, but uh, you can use those things, no? You can present it one by one or bullet by bullet, and then use the transition, whatever. Okay? And then use audio effectively. So audio must be appropriate to your presentation. So like for example, if you are trying to catch the attention of the audience, then probably you can use some audio on your presentation. No? Then it should enhance the presentation and not be overbearing or distracting. So if you decide to make to use an audio in your presentation, be sure that it will not distract the audience. No, okay, and it should not be overbearing. So in other words, it should supplement your presentation, no? That it will be very uh, or it will catch the attention of your audience. Okay, then sound can be used to introduce topic, build excitement, or add special effects. Okay, so again, you can use all of this, no, in doing your presentation later on. You can apply these things to make your presentation better and more effective. Okay, so it's up to you. But of course, you need to really learn how to use these things, no? These tips or strategies in presenting effectively. Okay? Then if you are presenting, you need also to create handouts and posters, no? Like for example, in a seminar, normally the speaker prepare handouts uh, to be given to the audience or the participants. Okay, so audience will only remember a small part of the content of your presentation. So provide handouts for reference and as reminders of the key points in your presentation. So that's the reason why a lot of speakers in a seminar really gives out handouts, no? Again, it could be, it's up to you on whether you give it before the the seminar starts or at the end. But if you wanted to, for the audience to take down important points or they can follow, no, based on the outline of your presentation through the use of the handouts given to them, then the audience can also take notes, some key points in your presentation and list it down or take down notes at the in the handouts given. Okay. Now for the posters, this is ideal if you are just talking for or talking in front of few audiences, no, probably two or three. Okay. But if for a wide or big audience, then you need to uh, give handouts. Okay. Now the purpose of handouts, these are the, or what are the purpose of handouts? So it will be useful in guiding your listeners through the presentation, of course. Again, as I've said, it will help your listeners, no, or the audience to take down notes. And then it will also help your audience to follow the presentation and stay involved. Okay. So if you've noticed or if you already experienced, no, attending a particular seminar or training wherein a handout is given before the start of the presentation, then you really take down notes, no, in your handouts, whatever the speaker is talking, or examples given during the presentation. So again, handouts is really helpful. Again, can be used for note taking. And then it is also used to supply with detailed information that is too long to place on visuals. Okay, so the speaker can also, instead of presenting it or writing it in the presentation or the slides, then if it requires a longer information, no, so it would be best that it will be written down in the handouts or it will be included in the handouts but not on the slides. So again, in your slides, as I've said earlier, limit your text or wordings on just on those important words or uh, phrases that you wanted to emphasize. So if you think the audience need more information, then write it down or include it down in your handouts. Okay, so it can also be used to summarize main points and then of course distribute a summary handout after you have given the presentation. Okay, so aside from the handouts, which outline the topics, no, or the major points that you are presenting, as a summary, you can also give a summary, which is an additional handouts for the audience or the audience or the listeners. for them to be guided on what are those things you, especially those key points, no, or major points you presented to them. So you can give them a summary handout. Another visuals that you can also use in presenting is poster, no? So display posters. It can be used to reinforce the content of a presentation. Okay, so like for example, if you wanted to display a graphics or a table, no, uh, and then using posters, and it will also uh, help restate key points and introduce a new product or review a visual elements. So those are the usage, no, if you wanted to use a poster as your visuals. Now, aside from individual presentation, uh, working would also be presenting through a team presentation, no? Like for example, if you will be as a group to present, okay? So you need to plan for a team presentation. So when you will be tasked to plan a team presentation, the first thing that you wanted to do is determine roles of individuals of the group, no? So in other words, choose among you your leader, no? Your group leader, and then assign what are those respective roles or different roles that you need to assign to your members in order to do a team presentation. And of course, you need to work as a team, okay? So as much as possible, all members of the group must have their tasks and responsibilities, and they should work, no? All of you must work, okay? So that ends our topic, the second topic. Now let's proceed with delivering a presentation. So for the learning objectives, so in this topic, you are going to apply methods for practicing and preparing for a presentation, describe appropriate personal appearance for making presentations, and apply proper techniques for communicating with the audience. Now, when you do presentation, the first another thing that you need to know to do is, of course, number one, to prepare the meeting room or the area, no, or the location wherein you are going to present your presentation. Okay, so you need to make sure the seating arrangement is appropriate. Arrive early to set up equipment and support materials. So practice ahead of time with specific equipment to be used. Sorry for the typographical error. It should be to be used in the presentation. Test the audio equipment and get comfortable with the microphone. Know whom to call if you need a technician. So check the lighting in the room and determine the best light level to use. And of course, check the room temperature. Okay, so these are the things that you need to do before you start the presentation. And then for the room arrangement, this will guide you on what arrangement you're going to use, no? When you make a presentation. I mean, whether it's a meeting or present seminars or whatever, no? So a semicircular or U arrangement is good for an audience that will focus on visuals at the front of the room. So it also helps presenter control the focus of the group. So this U arrangement or semicircular arrangement is commonly used by speakers, no, in a seminar. So U arrangement is ideal. Okay, then rectangular seating arrangement, if presenter is standing before the audience, can also be done. And circular or oval is helpful to group discussions. Like for example, if you do debriefing, like for this pandemic, no, there are a lot of workers who were affected mentally or emotionally because of the pandemic, the fear of the virus. So some companies do psychological first aid. Okay, so they do debriefing in order to help those employees mentally, So circular or oval arrangement is ideal for that particular activity, So especially because it involves group discussions. Okay, so these are the different arrangement you can use when you make your presentation. And another one is you need to consider your appearance too, no? So dressing appropriately help you gain their respect and hold attention. So be neat and clean in your appearance, practice good grooming. So formal presentation, if you are preparing for a formal presentation, a business suits are appropriate. So if it is an informal presentation, again, sorry for the typographical error. It should be informal, not information. Informal presentation, casual depending on the audience. Okay. Again, please correct this one. No? It should be informal presentation. And of course, dress comfortably but conservatively. Now, another thing that you need to know when you deliver your presentation is you must communicate with your audience. Okay. So you first, again, you need to maintain eye contact. Avoid non-words or sounds or words that do not contribute to the meaning of the presentation. Like for example, in my case, I tend to say or or no. Okay, so those are example of non-words or sound words. Excuse me. The next is show enthusiasm and speak convincingly. Control your postures and gestures. Use good intonation, vary inflection to help you sound more interesting. So avoid monotone, no? Like just like uh, you sound like a robot when talking. So should you're you should use proper intonation and then keep the audience focused. Okay. So in delivering your message, you must speak convincingly and you must show enthusiasm, no? Now, if you are able to observe, no, personally, or try to assess yourself, a speaker tend to deliver the message uh, uh, with lack of enthusiasm, especially if the speaker doesn't know what he is talking about, no, or probably is not interested on the topic. Okay, so if you observe some speakers, you can really say that the speaker is uh, very knowledgeable, or he is really interested on the topic being discussed because of his or how he presented the topic with enthusiasm, and of course is his or she is being convincing, no, the way he delivers the topic. So that shows the interest of that particular speaker. Okay, so like for example, if you wanted to convince your audience as the decision maker, like if you're selling a product, then you must be knowledgeable on the product you are selling, or probably another thing is you should have a personal experience in using that particular product you are selling, no? So at least you can really share with enthusiasm the your approval on that particular product you are selling, no, because you personally experience and how good the product is, no, or effective. Okay, so and of course during the questions and answer, so normally before the presentation ends or the speaker ends his presentation, he normally asks questions, no, of course the purpose of that is to assess the audience their understanding on the topic, or if there are clarifications that they need to ask, no? So when someone or one of the participants will ask a question, you need to restate the question, no? Because sometimes the audience who asks the question, uh, he or she normally directs the question to you, and others cannot hear the question. Okay, so especially if it's a large group. Okay, so you need to restate the questions for the others to hear. Okay, and then anticipate listeners' questions. In other words, while you are still delivering your topic or your presentation, you need to anticipate the listener's question. In other words, what they may ask you later on, no, during the question and answer session. So anticipating listeners' question will help the speaker prepare, no, how to answer or how to address those questions later on. And lastly, respond to the question. Of course, you need to answer the question of the audience. Now, there are also instances wherein a particular audience, no, will ask a lot of questions, and then probably others will think na they were already left behind, or probably uh, those particular listener who ask a lot of questions will monopolize the question portion, no? So as a speaker, you need to know how to address that kind of situation. So if that would be the case, it would an eye contact would help. So if a particular audience asks question, then you address him as well. Of course, not just the one who asked questions, but the group as well. And in case there will be a follow-up question, you need to divert to other listeners for them to ask their or deliver their questions, no? So in other words, you need to do your best that others could also be given time, no, uh for them to ask question. Okay, so do not be drawn to to one person monopolizing the question portion, no? Okay, so again, that's how you prepare your presentation. So you need to anticipate what are the things that would probably will happen, no, at the end of your presentation. Okay, so that ends our discussion for today. So again, if you have questions, so I expect you to that when you start watching this presentation, no, you already take down notes and of course questions as well. So again, you may give your questions to our class Biddle, but of course, if you want a direct answer to those questions, so you can actually directly message me, no, on those questions. Okay, I could answer right away. Okay, so that ends our discussion today. So have a good day, everyone.